Okay guys, welcome to another video. In today's video, I think I labeled it prepping for apartment dwellers, or how apartment dwellers can prep. First, I want to address why this is a live stream and why I've been doing live streams recently. It's out of pure laziness. And there's some other reasons too, but um, I want to film all these videos. I have kind of this old slow computer, and I don't want to get a new one until this one's completely done. And the amount of work and time it takes to film, or to write notes, to research, to film, then upload that to my computer, edit it so it's more concise, so I can clip out a lot of just me going off on these trails. And then from there, even uploading it, it takes like an hour, hour and a half. I have a fairly fast internet connection, but my computer just uploads really slow. So that's kind of why I've been doing more live streams. And actually, a lot of people kind of enjoy them, and it's kind of fun to do. It's kind of interactive. Um, but the biggest reason is it's a lot easier. So this, I'm probably going to give myself like a 1 hour time limit. This is a really broad subject, and I want to cover some things in detail. But at the same time, if I was to cover everything in detail, it would be really long. Um, but one thing that I've realized is in kind of the prepping, Pete Pearson, how you doing? Um, in the prepping world, and whether it's books, sometimes movies, or how-to videos on YouTube, they seem to be centered around the kind of middle-aged family with a house with maybe an oversized yard or like a little homestead. Um, but there's not really any books or videos out there on YouTube talking about how people in less than ideal living circumstances, or alternative living circumstances like living in an apartment or a townhouse or community living, how they can prep. They're kind of left out of the mix. They're like, yeah, you can just figure it out. You can follow along, but there's not a lot of videos out there oriented more towards them. So I do want to say I've never lived in an apartment, so it's kind of silly that I'm making this video, but I have friends and family that have lived or are living in apartments. And for the vast majority of the country, um, especially in larger cities, a lot of the population lives in apartments. Now, um, I've heard it multiple times. People, they're like, well, I want to stockpile some stuff. I want to prep, but I live in an apartment. I don't have a lot of space. I'll prep in a couple years after I move, but I can't because I live in an apartment. Or insert kind of those other categories like a condo or a townhouse or something like that. Um, but that's kind of the exact reason why you should, because you're in a less than ideal, less than perfect world. Yeah, that's another perfect example. Living in an RV, it's kind of the same thing. You're dealing with limited space. You don't really have a yard. So for people already living in apartments, they already know the downsides, but I just want to go through kind of the quick ones that I wrote down, and then also some of the positives, because it's good to be both optimistic and pessimistic. A mix of both is kind of good. A lot of people tend to focus on all the negatives, but there are some positives. So, like the big one is there's no yard, garden space. There's not any space for you to have like chickens or a small garden, produce food, fruit trees, um, and stuff like that. You generally don't really have any yard. Um, Little privacy, meaning most modern um, apartments, by code, they do have sound insulation between the um, apartments, but it's pretty much once you leave the door of your apartment, like you don't really have a lot of privacy. And even within that apartment, you don't have that much privacy. Um, Limited space, which we kind of already talked about, but you generally don't have as much space. Let's say under 1,000 square feet. Um, you don't have a lot of space to dedicate towards keeping some things stored. Limited points of egress, meaning if you're not on the ground level, it's kind of like you have your main entrance door, and if you were to ever get trapped, that's your only way out. And especially if you live in one of those tall apartments, now you're having to deal with um, getting down flights of stairs. It's kind of a mess. So limited egress and ingress. Um, and it's a big fire hazard, and that's kind of a secondary situation that a lot of people would living in apartments would have to deal with is you have a lot of people, and let's say something bad does kick off, a lot of those people will probably leave, especially if the electricity's out and it's kind of cold and people are scared that they won't be able to feed their family or keep them warm. They're probably going to leave. But the people that do stay, they might have the bright idea of like building, the books on their shelf, starting a fire to cook some hot dogs to feed their kids or something like that, or lighting tons of candles because they don't have any electricity and they want to be able to see, and one of their pets or one of their kids knocks one of those candles down, and now you have a big fire. And I guess you wouldn't really know that your building's on fire until you visually see the flame or smell the smoke, because the fire alarms, even those might not go off. There's not if the electricity's off. Um, so compared to just a normal homesteader or a normal homeowner living in an apartment, you're at a really increased risk of fire hazard. Uh, I also wrote down hard alternative heat. I'm going to talk about that in a second. I don't know why I put just heat, because kind of all your utilities is going to be kind of hard to replicate those compared to someone living in a house in like a neighborhood. Um, the pros I want to touch on for a second, because a lot of people like to focus on the bad parts of living in an apartment, but um, the pros, what I wrote down is vantage advantage. So depending on what floor, there is kind of that advantage of you. Think about a deer hunter in a deer stand. You being 30 feet, 40 feet up, you have kind of a tactical advantage, I guess you want to call it, of depending on which way your apartment's facing and how many windows you have, you do kind of have that advantage of being able to maybe see danger before it sees you. The other pro is a single point of entry, which we talked about in the cons, but especially if there's kind of bad people going through the apartment complex and you only have one door and you barricade that to the point where it would take chainsaws or explosives to get that door out of there, they're probably not going to spend time trying to get to you, because they also don't know what's on the other side of the door. So you don't know how many of them, and they don't know if it's only you, a single person, or there could be a group of 10 of you armed with AKs or something. So you just have one kind of point in which you would have to barricade yourself in. As a pro, I wrote close to town in quotes, meaning compared to someone living out in the country, if it's kind of more of a slow slide or it's just a power outage and there's not mass chaos and mass violence going on, you do still have that advantage of possibly gathering extra resources or um, stuff like that. Maybe the gas isn't all the way gone yet. And we haven't really talked about a specific disaster, but generally speaking, most citywide disasters, let's call them, gas and food are the first things to go. Violence tends to ensue. Um, Police is kind of diluted, so they can't handle and go to every single home robbery, home break-in, and area of violence in the city. But that advantage of kind of being close to town could be a good thing if you were to do it strategically and safely. And then hiding in plain sight. And what I mean by hiding in plain sight is if you contrast an apartment building and you living in one of the apartments inside of a bigger apartment unit versus a lone house in the middle of nowhere up on a hill where guys can see from a mile away and are able to plan kind of an attack or whatever you want to call it, in an apartment, they don't know exactly where you're at. They don't know how many people left that building. They don't know if that building's full of people that are ready to kind of defend their building or not. Um, so there is kind of an advantage there. So I want to touch on, these are kind of just the main basic tenets of prepping, but how you might have to bend them or distort them a little bit for your special circumstances. So the first big one is water storage, and that's a big one for prepping in general. The advantage of, like, if you live kind of out in the country, there's the possibility that you have well water, and you'll kind of always have a supply of water, or you're by a stream, or you have a natural spring on your property or something like that. Um, versus in an apartment, probably all the water you have stored in your apartment is all the water you'll ever see, unless there's areas nearby that you could collect water. But if we assume that your drinking water, the tap water, goes out, then the water you have stored in your apartment is pretty much all that you'll have. So a few options. I guess an easy button would be just every time you go grocery shopping, get like a 24 pack of bottled water. Keep in mind that's one of the most expensive ways to buy water, even though it seems really cheap. But the other option, and this product I haven't tried, I use a product called Aquatainers. They're 7-gallon blue rectangular food grade plastic containers to hold water. But this other product, which I haven't tried, but they're called water bricks, and they're a 3.5-gallon rectangle, and they can kind of fit together like Legos. You put like two the other way, and they stack up, and they're so you're able to stack it. And the advantage of that is you might be able to maximize that amount of limited space you have within that apartment. So if you have dead areas in closets, in linen closets, for example, maybe the bottom couple feet are empty, and then there's shelves that you keep sheets or blankets on or something. Or if there's a coat closet, maybe in the very back you could have a stack of 4 of them, or a stack of 8 of them, or in like the bedroom, within the closet, maybe you could stack them 4 high and almost make like a little table. You could throw a blanket or towel on top, and then just put your shoes on top of there instead of putting them on the floor. But options like that, I couldn't really tell you the amount of water to store. I guess more is always better, but you are kind of limited by physical space. But if you figure those Aquatainer or those water bricks are 3.5 gallons, even having 10 of those, that would be about 35 gallons. If you're a single guy, that would roughly be 1 month of water if you only used 1 gallon a day, and that's kind of the bare minimum a lot of people like to recommend. But generally, it's probably going to be closer to 2 or 3 gallons a day. So for one guy or one person, that might be a 2-week supply, 35 gallons, but that would kind of be stretching it. And I guess I'm not recommending 35 gallons, but you could also diversify your supplies. There's another product called the water bulb, which is a giant plastic bag that fits inside most bathtubs. And if you are pre-alerted of something bad happening, at least a few hours notice, you pretty much put it in there, turn the faucet to your tub on. Somewhere I found a bag that you put in your bathtubs. Yep, so that's the product I'm talking about now. It's called the water bulb. And I actually have one of these. I haven't used it, so I don't even know if they work, but the only issue I would see is it's almost like a one-use item, because once you fill it up and then you're done with it, the other thing is you'd have to be really sure something bad was going to happen, because the only way to empty it is to use like some type of pump. But it pretty much, it fits in a bathtub, and the advantage is it has a cap, so then that way you don't just have sitting water, it's actually kind of sealed. And you have to keep in mind, if your water's off, you're probably not going to be taking baths or showers, so it is going to eliminate your ability to use your bathtub, but at the same time, it probably won't be being used anyways. Um, so I don't know the exact capacity. I want to say at least 80 gallons. I mean, it holds a lot of water. So that would be the other option. And the other thing is like if you fill that water bottle up with um, to use for when you don't need like sterile or clean water, and then your stored water was purely for drinking. So if you wanted to clean, wash your hands and stuff like that, you could use it out of the water bob, not knowing whether or not it's drinkable. Um, but then also it would be smart to have a way to filter water. What I have, it's called the Big Berkey. It's a gravity-fed ceramic filter. But even some of those camping water filters, some of them that are made are two plastic bags and a filter inline. So you fill the top one with dirty water, and even inside of a house, all you would have to do is hang a hook from the ceiling, fill it with dirty water, rainwater, or water that you didn't know was clean or not, hang it from that ceiling, and then it just gravity flows into that bottom bag. Um, One thing I would avoid is relying on boiling water to clean your water because you're going to be very limited on fuel and your cooking methods. So, whatever you could do to eliminate the need to boil water to drink it would also be advantageous. And there's multiple other methods, storage containers that I'm missing. The two big ones that I was thinking about for kind of someone in an apartment would what is that water bob, the bathtub water tank, and those water bricks. The next thing is food, and a lot of people say you can survive 3 weeks or something without food, and you can go ahead and try. But kind of the whole point of prepping is so you don't need to see how tough or how resilient your body is. Um, so you can survive. Like me personally, I've gone without eating for like I don't know 2 or 3 days, or eating very minimal food. But even that minor experiment, even though it's anecdotal, you get really grumpy. You get kind of hangry, as some people call it. You just kind of feel gross. You don't have any really energy. Um, so, food's kind of important, even if it's just to keep your peace of mind and your sanity. If you're hunkered down in this apartment and now you don't have any food, and it's dangerous to go outside, and there's violence everywhere, and now you're dealing with starvation on top of everything. It doesn't seem that smart. And food, that's kind of interesting too, because generally, if you're going to be limited on fuel and ways to cook, I wouldn't necessarily stockpile staples, meaning I probably wouldn't stockpile like rice, wheat, beans, corn, oats, sugar, flour, oils, and that type of thing. I wouldn't really stockpile baking supplies because you have to figure how are you going to cook, and then what fuel you're going to use to cook with, and now you have to store that fuel. So it's kind of adding to the logistical problem. So I would consider things that are kind of pre-made, that require heating. And the other thing is freeze-dried and dehydrated foods. For backpacking, they're really good. They're lightweight, and because the water is taken out, the food can be really compact. So if you're limited on space parameters, you would think maybe freeze-dried and Mountain House and dehydrated foods would be the best. Um, but then the issue you run into is to prepare all that, you're relying on that stored water. So by having dehydrated foods, you're separating the food and the water. Or you can have wet packed foods that don't require water for cooking or for eating them, and that would save you on your water. So I guess my point is, if you stock a lot of dehydrated and freeze dried meals, conversely, you'd have to increase that amount of stored water you have. So you don't really win either way. The other thing is the cost behind freeze dried and dehydrated foods, but they are fairly easy to cook. But the other issue you run into is you kind of need to boil that water. You need to get that water to a boil. Versus if you had pre cooked foods, canned foods, even MREs, which I don't really like, but I guess for this application could work. Foods that you don't necessarily have to heat to a certain temperature to kill the bacteria, if there's raw meats or something in there. But food that you can eat cold, but it just tastes better heated up. The benefit there is you could use alternative ways of heating the food. I, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that way you're not reliant on a really strong heat source. You could even, if you had a candle lit, you could even uh, warm food, over a candle. A candle doesn't put out a lot of heat, but if you had more foods that you only had to heat up instead of boil or cook for a certain amount of time, that would be beneficial. Um, but it also goes back to the food, and it's really important, especially in this circumstance, the eat what you store what you eat principle, because you don't want to be running into dietary issues and digestive issues by eating all this food that your body's never consumed before, um, in the 11th hour or in this kind of SHTF, because now you have another situation on top of whatever's going on. So whatever foods you regularly eat, definitely have those, but then on top of that, maybe things that are pre-planned. Let me just read some of these comments. Pete, as you're sterilizing your water, heat and emery. And that's a really good idea. If you do need to heat up water for anything, boil water to clean it. At the same time, you could warm. You could even put a can of baked beans, or as he said, an MRE entree, for example, within that boiling water. Along with foods, cooking. And cooking, I kind of wrote down heat and cooking kind of for me go hand in hand. Now, the issue you're going to run into, and this isn't the case everywhere, but what I've noticed the trend to be is within especially large apartment complexes, generally they're all electric. My thinking is it's easier to run more electricity to every single apartment than having to deal with gas lines. So the house I'm in, we have city gas or natural gas for our heating and for cooking. Even if the electricity is off, the gas is still running, and you can light the stove with a match or a lighter. So I could still cook with our gas even if our electricity was off. Generally speaking, most apartments are all electric. I guess the reasoning, kind of my caveman thinking, is having to run gas to multiple apartment buildings. You start running into issues with gas pressure. If tons of people are using their gas, and the person at the end of the line, the pressure won't be there. And I'm thinking that's the reason why. But a lot of apartments tend to be all electric, and it's probably easier with billing and stuff like that too. So if the electricity is out, most likely you're going to be out of heating, and you're going to be out of cooking, and out of hot water and a lot of other things. But heating and cooking would be a big one. And pretty much for cooking, there's a few options, and none of them I would say are ideal. The main one that comes to mind is something that I just keep in our house, and it's a 2-burner Coleman propane stove. And they're designed purely to be used in a camping setting outside. And even on the, so you mentioned solar, and in like 2 seconds, I'm going to bring up solar also. But the first thing, the 2-burner Coleman stove, when you open it up, in big writing, it says warning, don't use it indoors or something like that. I've used it indoors, and I'm not recommending you use it indoors, but if you needed to use it indoors, you could do so and you wouldn't die, and it would be relatively safe. And I guess for added safety, if you lived on, say, a second or third story and you had a balcony, you could always set up a little cook station out on that balcony, and you could cook out on that balcony to be a little safer. But if it's negative 20 degrees outside, you might not want to do that. But either way, anytime you're burning an external fuel source within a house or an apartment, there's safety that comes along with that. So the Coleman 2-burner stove comes to mind, but now there's the issue of having to somehow stockpile propane, 20-pound propane canisters or 1-pound green canisters. Um, so that's one option. The other option that I've heard people talk about is like sterno. So sterno is like this canned gelled heat, um, right, that you light up. And I've used that a handful of times. I wouldn't really say it's super reliable. And the other thing is when you look at the cost per BTU, it's fairly expensive. Sterno doesn't put out a lot of heat. It's also, I don't believe, recommended for indoor use. It might be. And I don't know exactly what sterno is. I think it's like a gelatinized version of alcohol or something like that. Um, so you could certainly store up on that, and I'm sure it lasts a long time. But it is fairly expensive. But that would be another option. And then as a fringe benefit, most of these heating options would also output BTUs into the apartment or heat. So the other cooking option, which is something I haven't tried, but going through this process of if I was in an apartment, how would I cook is Pete, he brought it up a few minutes ago in the live stream or in the comments, is solar. And there's companies, and you can also make your own, but there's a lot of companies out there. There are these big solar cookers, and I think it's called like a parabolic mirror or a parabolic lens or something like that. But I believe it's kind of like this curved mirror. The sun comes in and kind of all the light rays gets concentrated onto like a focal point. And underneath is where all the heat's captured. So you can put your food in there and heat it up. Um, and I'm sure that's a really good option. And I would rather have that option than not have it. I haven't personally used those before. The other thing is it's relying on sunlight. So if the sun's not out and you want to cook, you can't really use that option. But if the sun was out, it would be smarter to use that natural resource, that unlimited resource, as opposed to using your stored fuel. So that would be the other option, especially out on a balcony. You could just have your Coleman stove, and right next to that, you could have your solar cooker. Uh, again, we could probably talk for hours on each one of these categories, but the next one is power, and or electricity. Now, many people will say you don't need electricity, and I've heard people say, 200 years ago our ancestors did everything without electricity, and that's certainly true. But we're not talking 200 years ago. We're talking today. A lot of people are, in a way, kind of addicted to electricity. They rely on electricity every day. It's always there. They don't really think about it until it's not there. But long story short, again, kind of the reason you prep is so you don't have to run into learning how to live without electricity. So if you can prepare beforehand one or alternative methods to produce electricity, that's really beneficial. Now, one option that people would consider, and with every year it seems like they're getting cheaper, are solar panels. The portable, they're kind of designed more for camping, but some are flexible, and they can roll up or fold up, and you can keep it in your closet. During the middle of the day, you could have your solar oven, your solar cooker out on your balcony, and then you could have your solar panels. And you could charge your phones and electronics and stuff like that. But they're, if it's rated to 100 watts, you're not going to get, so if like a solar panel is rated to 100 watts, even if the sun's really bright, every time you move, or every time you collect, move, and store electricity, each one of those things you lose a little bit. Plus, long story short, if it says 100 watts, you're probably going to get maybe 75 watts. You're going to get a lot less than what's advertised. And then as it's moving and charging, you kind of lose efficiency along the way. But that's one option that's silent. That's kind of free once you have them. And that would be a good option. 80 watt Harbor Freight. you're probably talking about those solar panels, and that's something that in high school, in middle school, I read a lot about photovoltaics that were later people just call them solar panels. And I remember even back then it was very expensive. Even a small panel, you're talking a few $100. But I've been looking recently, even on Amazon, they're kind of these knockoff, no-name brands, but you can get these fairly good-sized panels for reasonable. Um, I wouldn't necessarily say they're really cheap, but compared to 10, 15, 20 years ago, they're a lot cheaper. So the other option is something a little more reliable, but it does require a little more logistical support, and that would be a generator. Now, you might be thinking, how are you going to use a generator inside of an apartment? So my idea would be if I lived on the second or third floor of an apartment building and I had a balcony. They're normally not that big, but if you have your Coleman stove out there and then you have your solar cooker and your solar panels and you kind of have this little station out there, it's elevated and there's normally not external steps, so it is relatively safe from. It'd be hard for people to steal those supplies. Something that I thought about is if you look up 2,000-watt inverter generator. They're really common within the RVing world, but they're kind of these small suitcase-sized generators. And the generator I have, it's a 3,000 watt, but it's an inverter generator, and I don't have to get into the exact technology behind them, but long story short, they're a lot quieter and they're a lot more efficient than the old gas guzzling contractor type gas generators with the tubular frame. And what I was thinking about is if you had a balcony, and I'm not saying this would be 100% safe, but if you had a balcony, if you ran it out on your balcony with the exhaust going away, and if you wanted to be really safe, you could have like carbon monoxide detectors inside the house, and if there's any, if you're sensing that carbon monoxide's coming into your apartment, end the whole process and come up with something else. But you had out on your balcony a small 2,000 watt inverter, you're going to deal with fumes, but it's you're not. I guess what I'm saying is not running it inside your apartment, but out on a balcony, or if you live on the ground floor and you have a patio, you could run it. But that would be an option. Then you'd run extension cords. The benefit of the inverter generators is they're really, really quiet. The one I have, like I said, is a 3,000 watt, 3,500 watt surge, and it's quoted at being, I believe, 59 decibels loud, or I should say quiet. And I run it every month or every few months. I'll just run it for like 15-20 minutes. That's kind of the recommended protocol. And from where it is, it's about maybe 15 feet. It's outside, of course. And it's running and it's super quiet. And when you're right next to it, it seems kind of loud. But I'll walk inside and I don't hear it. And if I do hear it, it's because I'm searching for that noise. And I'm trying to find that noise. But they're really, really quiet. So a lot of people talk about the security and the operational security behind generators and how it will attract attention. The new modern inverter generators are really, really quiet. But along with that, what I would do, it's kind of what I set up here, is building a battery bank. So using AGM sealed deep cycle batteries are safe to use. There's these deep cycle batteries. You'll have to look them up, but they're safe to use inside. And you can have one or two linked, and I won't get into the exact ways how to link them together, but you pretty much run one or two or 10, but you pretty much have just a car charger. And when you're running that generator, you have that charger plugged in, and that's charging those batteries up. And then you can flip that generator off, and if you need electricity, you can take it out of your batteries. And then if you, we're kind of getting off topic, but if you wanted to run like AC appliances, you would have an inverter and you would build your system according to what you needed. But that combination of having a small inverter type generator outside and a battery, a backup battery bank inside, especially if you coupled it with that solar, so whenever the sun was shining, all that electricity was producing was being charged into that battery. That would be a really cool, smart, and efficient system, and that's really similar to what I have set up for when the power goes out where I live here. Um, the next thing I want to talk about is fire safety. And we already talked about being in an apartment, you're at a huge increased risk of house fire or apartment fire. And whether you or other people, um, whether you or other people within that apartment does even something kind of dumb, if someone else living in the apartment, say they have candles lit to provide light, and they knock, a candle over, and it starts the curtain on fire, and it starts their apartment, they're probably not going to go throughout the apartment and say, "Hey, there's a fire." Well, actually, they might, but they could also just get their belongings and leave and be like, "I'm out of here. I don't want to be responsible for this." Um, so you're at a really increased risk of um, your apartment building burning down. Um, so it's fairly easy. What I wrote down is number one would be battery powered smoke detectors. I would kind of recommend using 9-volt lithium batteries, or sometimes they're AA, but using AA lithium batteries, because you can put them in there and forget, and they seem to almost never run out of power. And don't just have one, have like three, have four, um, have more than, I guess, what the minimum that the fire code recommends. Smoke detectors, some of them are smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. Um, Fire extinguishers are cheap and they're plentiful, and they might have a shelf life. But I have these two, they're pressurized water, they're silver and they're really big, and it's pretty much water, and then you put air, it's pressurized water canisters or fire extinguishers that probably date back to the 90s. And they sit like year in, year out. And one time I was like, I don't even know if these work. And I tried it. That water was probably in there for 20 years, and it threw water out at a really high pressure. And they're refillable and stuff like that. But you can research more using the proper like ABC type fire extinguisher, and not just the little ones. You can have a couple small ones, but also if you had one or two of the really big ones, they're like 15 or 20 pounds. They're kind of pricey, but they would be fairly beneficial. Or you could just have a lot of the little ones. Keep in mind, if you're trying to put out a fire, the last thing that's on your mind is, oh, I should have bought a smaller fire extinguisher. Most people don't say that. Um, but the other big thing too is ladders, and I found them on Amazon. I live in a single story structure, so I don't have any of these. But they're made by Kidde, um, Kidde, and they're fire escape ladders. And they're not the safest thing out there, and they're kind of a rope ladder, and it's not going to be fun to climb down. But they have these hooks that hook over a window, and I think they're rated for 2 or 3 stories. I don't know the exact length of them. If you were to buy one, you could set it and roll it out and measure, so you kind of know beforehand how long it is. But if you have that balcony or one of those windows, um, on Amazon, I think they're like 25 or 30 bucks. So you could even have like two of them. Um, Maybe you only have 2 or 3 main windows that actually like open. Having one of those nearby, clearly labeled, um, so that would be an option, not just for if there was a fire, but if for some other reason you had to expediently leave your apartment and you couldn't use your main door. that would give you another egress option. So those escape ladders. The other thing, which I haven't used, but I know they could be effective, and different agencies and stuff, I believe, use them, but they're called fire masks. And I don't know how effective they are, but it's kind of this big plastic bag that you actually put over your whole head, and it has a breathing apparatus. And it's not, it allows you, I'll leave a link under this live stream. I believe they're called fire masks, and they're kind of expensive, but it's a breathing apparatus that would allow you to breathe um, through minor smoke. So if you're not going to be able to run through a building when it's on fire and be able to breathe just fine, it's going to be more difficult, but it's going to be a lot safer than breathing in that air. 5 minute supply. Yeah, so they don't last a long time, but 5 minutes, that might give you enough time to get out of that building. Because, yeah, I think they're somehow pre-charged with oxygen. Um, and the other thing is that I've considered, I don't own them because I don't really have a need for them. But if you're really getting into this and you were really wanting to prep this apartment, having one or multiple firefighting tools. Now, in certain cities and in certain states, there might be legality issues. But the common one's called a halogen tool. And it's pretty much a multi-tool pry bar, a lever. There's a tool to rip off padlocks, and there's a pipe there's multiple tools on it, and you would either have to get proper training, or if you knew a firefighter or some type of emergency personnel that has had training, they could maybe give you some pointers. Because especially if you're on a higher level of this apartment and now you're trying to get out and the doors are locked or barricaded or something, that tool that tool would be gold, right? The other one is called there's multiple tools, so you'll have to look them up, but there's different tools that are designed to rip through drywall walls fairly easy, and most interior walls of apartment complexes are drywall. So if you couldn't use the door, I guess it would give you more ways of escaping that building. And there's a lot more that I'm not really covering, just because I don't have a ton of knowledge with it. But the next thing is home security. And actually, I'm going to cover home security last. A couple other miscellaneous things to consider. One would be blackout curtains on your main, because most apartments you have windows. Because yeah, so I won't go into the architecture of how apartments are built, but generally all apartments, they have at least a few windows. So blackout curtains, you could sew them. I'm sure you can buy them, but a thick, heavyweight curtain that didn't transmit light either in or out. So if you do have electricity and you do have some lights inside of that apartment, but the whole rest of the city is so I apologize. Okay, I apologize for all those comments. I'm trying to like reach them, but I'm also filming on a phone, so all the comments are really small. So I apologize, I missed those. What was I talking about? Oh, so the miscellaneous, the blackout curtains, right? So if you're the only apartment and the whole rest of the city is without power, and especially if you're in this tall building, right, that's easily visible, and the whole rest of the city is dark, and then they see through no, you can keep going with the comments. I wasn't complaining. I got on a talking point and I was trying to follow the comments. Normally I have my stream playing on the laptop, so it's easier to see the comments. But the blackout curtains, if it's a world without power, but you have power, and you're producing light and stuff like that, and there's people, and they see flashlights and lanterns and stuff dancing around in this single window of this apartment building, you're kind of advertising. Um, you're kind of advertising that you have at least some resources that allow you to have light, um, and it wouldn't be good advertising. So having blackout curtains, and if you want to do it on the cheap, there's easy ways to make them. You can make them so they look decorative. You can either have them stored, folded up, and stored under a bed, or you could, if you made them so they looked fairly nice, you could just use them as your standard curtains. Um, and there's a lot of different techniques. You could sew magnets into the hem of it, into the perimeter, and put corresponding pieces of metal along so the edges would get magnet shut, or you could use Velcro, but something to seal the edges of those curtains so it would block light coming in and light going out. And then they generally also insulate a little bit. So we were talking about heat. If you have these big expanses of window and glass is a very poor insulator. So having those blackout curtains, they would kind of pull double duty as also providing a layer of insulation, both for heat and also for sound. Um, so that's something to consider. And then, um, I mean, I wrote under miscellaneous, but like having radios, and radios goes along with cell phones. It could be two-way radios, but just alternative means of communicating. And not only communicating, but if you have radios, so having ways of both receiving incoming signals or transmissions, and also multiple ways of sending messages out. So it could be your cell phone and text messages, and if the other, man, I totally missed it. But if you have wireless internet and you have that generator and that battery bank going, that would actually allow you, and it's what I have set up here, you would be able to plug your router and modem into that inverter, into that battery bank, so you would have internet within that building. So it would allow you to stay on top of updates. So you'd be able to receive news without having to go and kind of walk around and talk to people and figure out what's going on. If you had an internet source, you'd be able to figure it out without leaving your apartment. So that would be kind of cool. And it would be communication, and it could be entertainment too. If you want to stream movies by having electricity. And the last two things I mentioned were exercise equipment. And it sounds really weird, but having maybe not an exercise bike, but some way of burning off some energy. Because if you're cooped up, especially if it's multiple people, now you're cooped up in the small space, there's going to be a lot of tension going on. So having exercise equipment, both to keep you busy and also just to not really burn off energy, but keep your mind off things, pump some blood and stuff like that, that would be beneficial. And the other thing, especially with little kids, but even if it's like a few adults in this apartment, is board games. They're not as common now as they used to be, surprisingly, but having suitable board games for whatever size, if you have small kids or older kids or adults, but a lot of board games, more than just a deck of cards, so you can have a deck of cards so you guys can like pass the time, but also there's a lot of different board games out there that are pretty fun, like party games. So I wanted to go to home security now, and we're at the 49-minute mark, and I was trying to cut this off at an hour. This might go a little bit past. Home security and self-defense I might skip. I'm still debating that. Home security, there's a few options. So home security would be both passive measures and active measures, meaning if you're able to know of people, or if you're able to see people, hear people, or somehow get signaled of people kind of approaching your location, so to speak, beforehand, before they're at your front door pounding it down, that's advantageous. Um, so having that vantage point we were talking about, being able to visually see people um, coming towards the apartment, or um, having motion detectors. So my grandparents, they used to do assisted living, take care of elderly people, and what they would have on the doorway, or what they would have on the steps, is it was just on the wall, and if you walk past it, it kind of made this noise. It was like a motion detector. So my idea is that, I don't know how much they are, but if you're to put one, if there's a hallway going each way in this apartment, you could possibly somehow mount one or two, and then have the transmitters inside your apartment. So when someone walks past, it would alert you. The other thing, and doing it now, especially with Amazon technology the way it is, getting a surveillance camera or multiple, but they actually make these wireless um, security cameras, so you don't have to run wires. So you could have one right outside your door, because a lot of apartments, they have that like peephole, so if someone's there, you can look through. Um, but the other option is, if you had a wireless security camera, you can mount it outside your door, so you would know. And this wouldn't only be a prep for just in case, but just on a day-to-day basis, if someone's knocking on your door and you aren't expecting anyone, you can look, at a TV screen, or it can be linked to your home TV or your laptop, I think even your cell phone, and you'd be able to see who's at your door. But then if you had a few of them, all kind of operating on the same system, you could have one by the stairs, the stairs that come up to your level of the apartment. Um, so you would be able to see people if they come up. And I'm not saying install these in your apartment right now, but I'm saying if you had them on hand and something bad happened and you wanted to be um, pre-warned, early warning detection, you could then at that point mount them, and I don't think anyone would complain. Um, the other thing that's really cheap and really common and fairly compact is screws and nails. Um, Cooking your food, compromise your location. Okay, yeah, so I'll get back to that comment because it was kind of long. But one thing that's really cheap, easy, and fairly compact is nails and screws. And with nails and screws, because if we're talking a really bad situation, whoever you're renting this apartment from, if you start driving screws and stuff in the wall, the apartment building itself is probably already compromised. And after all of it ends, they'll get insurance payouts anyways. So one thing that's really cheap and effective would be screws and nails. You can get a small, lightweight, cordless drill for really cheap, and hammers even cheaper. And you can have even like a 5 pound box of 3.5 inch, 3 or 3.5 inch, nails and screws. Then that can offer you a lot of advantages of fortifying your apartment, so people you don't want coming in um, can't get in. And also, I mean, you could say having plywood and boards and window bars and all this other stuff, but all that stuff takes up a lot of space, and you're kind of talking about limited space. One thing that I know is really common, I don't know the exact name of, and I've never used, just because I live in a fairly safe area, so I've never had a need for it. But it's this security bar, and you guys probably already know exactly what I'm talking about, but it runs at this 45 degree, and it goes under the door handle, and it somehow mounts to the floor. And there's a handle in the middle, so when you're going to bed at night, or if it's just really dangerous, you put it on there and clamp it somehow, and it just adds one extra layer of security to your main door. And a lot of people living in apartments, they tend to be in really bad areas of the city. So a lot of apartment dwellers probably already have this thing I'm talking about. And there's so many other dedicated ways, and then also ways to MacGyver security. So I just wanted to get to a few of these comments. There's one last category I want to talk about. I wanted to read this long comment. The most important thing is to assess your situation with cooking your food, or will cooking your food compromise your location? Will noise, will light, water? Someone sees water being thrown out. Home security gimmies. Yeah, so that's kind of another big issue within itself. Kind of like not operational security, but being able to do all these things, but not doing it quietly and without noise, or with minimal noise, with minimal light signature, with minimal odor. So doing all these things, that's the underlying issue also, is security, and I wouldn't really say privacy, but hiding the fact that you're alive and kind of not surviving but thriving with this within your apartment. You don't want to advertise that to the world. So that's also the underlying um, issue, and it's something I kind of talked about throughout with the blackout curtains. Whenever you're cooking, the odor, um, light signature, noise signature, um, and I didn't even, one category that I just totally skipped on here is you won't be washing your dishes, you won't be washing your clothes. So if you're going to be using your kitchen utensils and your kitchen plates and everything, you might be able to scrub them down with like a Brillo pad or whatever they're called, those green scratchy pads, but I guess it wouldn't be super sanitary. The other thing is garbage. If you're producing any garbage or waste, what are you going to do? Chuck it out your window, or so there's kind of a lot of issues that people would run into. Um, and the last thing I wanted to talk about is, which, yeah, I already covered a little bit, but self defense. And this is something that um, people go both ways on. There's a lot of people out there, whether by legality they're not allowed, or just personally they don't want to deal with firearms or anything. Um, but it's one of those things, it's better to plan for it, whether or not it happens or not. But kind of one of the biggest issues, and it's something that I've been talking about through the whole thing, this apartment thing. If you're in an apartment, it normally means you're within a large city. Within large city is the crime magnets. Large cities are crime magnets. That's where the majority of crime happens. Something kicks off, and it's not overnight people turn vicious, but let's say this is a 2-week event. Within 3-4 days, people are going to start getting cold. People are going to start getting hungry. Um, People are going to start getting very vicious and mean. And I say people, not everybody, but certain people. Um, you'll start seeing a lot of violent mobs and violent groups of people. And so the biggest issue is the self defense thing. And I could probably have a whole live stream or whole topic just on, like, home defense guns and choices. And there's articles amongst articles on what's the correct home defense weapon. And it's pretty much the proper one is the one that you have, right? So if you don't have any, even if you have one and it's not the correct one that the experts say is the perfect weapon, it's better than yelling at them, and it's better than throwing spatulas and kitchen plates at them. So the self-defense thing, I guess I couldn't nail down what the perfect weapon would be, but you would definitely want multiples, and you'd want to be trained on them. And I've kind of pondered this when I was taking these notes down and kind of researching this project. I was thinking to myself, on paper, what the best options would be. Many people would say a pistol, and I think a pistol would be a good thing to have. They're compact. it can always be on you. And a lot of people recommend those for like home defense. Um, but that's also for people already inside of your house. If there's people battering down your door and there's no emergency personnel, you can't call the cops and stuff like that. It's almost like you'd have to deal with that situation before they're inside your house, um, or inside your apartment. The other thing too is pistols are, um, I wouldn't necessarily say weak, but they lack power compared to long guns, to rifles. So I guess, like self defense would be a big one, but it's almost a subject within itself. And we're just rounding the 1 hour mark. And this is the one subject that I was going back and forth on because I can either brush over the subject or I can uh, dive deep. But probably one of the biggest things would be one of the biggest things I would say would be a 12 gauge loaded with number 4 buck or double aught buck, for tight quarters because apartments tend to be fairly small. That can be a pretty devastating weapon. Um, but the other thing to keep in mind, and this is alternative thinking, and we're not really talking home defense. We're not talking about if someone breaks in and you're able to call the police. Um, but if this is like a 2 week ordeal or a 1 month ordeal, no power, and there's just roving gangs and looters or whatever term you call them, um, a lot of people say, well, within a house, you don't want a firearm that can penetrate through multiple walls. But there's also that case to be made that you might want a round that can go through that door, or can go through that wall. Um, so yeah, whatever that weapon is, or multiple weapons, um, that's one area I definitely err on the side of having more than less, because when you actually need them, you're not, the last thing on your mind is, damn, we have too many guns here. But the other thing, and this seems sort of silly, but having some canisters of bear spray, pepper spray can certainly piss people off and make them more angry than they were previously. And sometimes it encourages people to come back harder the next time around. But um, it can also be a really good deterrent and make people like think twice, so that you can get these big canisters, and it's not something that you carry around with you daily, but having, one on your kitchen counter, one in your bedroom, um, they can, they're rated, I think, against like grizzly bears. They're fairly powerful, and they have a really long range and a pretty wide spread. And especially even if you had to shoot that down a hallway, hopefully not within your apartment, because then you'll probably get some of the aftershocks of that. But if you needed to send it down a hallway, it would pretty much, yep. So that's a good point. The bear spray, and that's kind of what I was saying too, is if you had early warning systems, and I can't get into all the legalities, but if you had to use it, if you're using it down the apartment out, if you're using it down the hallway of your apartment, that bear spray, I think it's rated to have like a 25 or 30 foot range and a really wide spread. It would fill that whole hallway 20 feet away with that pepper spray, that chemical. And even if it didn't make them stop, you would be at kind of a tactile advantage, because they're wiping their eyes, they're tearing up and everything. And if they keep persisting, then you kind of know they're serious, and you might have to like step up to something else. Um, so I'm just reading some of these last comments, and I'm probably going to flip the stream off. If that happens, you'll have to leave right after they do, because yeah, so that's a really big point, and I didn't even touch on the whole bailout bag, bug out bag um, thing. But certainly you would have one of those packed and ready to go. But And generally for most beginning preppers, that's kind of the first thing that they focus on is the bug out bag. So having a lightweight go bag, and then if your vehicle was locked inside of, like, if you had a parking garage or a individual locked storage unit that your vehicle was parked in, stocked, ready to go, it would be one option. If you didn't have that, um, having a fold-up bike, there's this one brand that makes a pretty cool folding bike that you can keep within your apartment. And if you needed to get away really quick, you'd throw your pack on, and even riding slow on a bike is a lot faster than even like sprinting, or fairly comparable. So that would be an option. That would kind of be your last, I guess, tier you'd have to worry about is evacuation. So hopefully you enjoyed this live stream. Well, like I said, I've been doing more of these live streams. It's just a lot easier than doing the whole process, cutting down, editing it. But the downside of that is the videos tend to be longer. I tend to ramble more, and maybe they tend not to be quite as concise. But hopefully you enjoyed this live stream. Like always, you can go back to my homepage, watch some videos. If you like what you see, feel free to subscribe. After this stream gets over, you can come back and leave some comments, and that will stay permanent. Amazon has them 35% off. I was so sure. So Amazon has what, 35% off? You're probably talking about the bear spray. And if that's the case, once this goes live, or once this gets uploaded, you should leave that in the comments, and then that will be a permanent comment under this video. But again, hopefully you guys liked it. I want to thank Peterson. I was so sure. I don't know your first name, but I want to thank both you guys for watching. I'm sure there's a few more watching that weren't leaving comments. But yeah, like always, you can go back to my homepage, watch my current videos. If you like what you see, you can subscribe. After this gets uploaded, make sure to give it a big like, big thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and subscribe. But yeah, we're signing off.